Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Stacy, and I'm a community manager here at Weaveworks. It's great to see everyone in the participants list. Drop us a hello and let us know where you're watching from in the chat. Hopefully, you're here today to hear from Abdallah, developer advocate at Testkube, who will be walking us through GitOps testing in Kubernetes with Flux and Testkube. So if you're brand new to our various Weaveworks or GitOps talks or series, welcome. And if you've been coming to these sessions for a while, welcome back. So a little bit of background, if this is your first time coming to one of these events, we've been running these for years now. The company that I work for is called Weaveworks. And if you haven't heard of us, we're a startup with a globally distributed and remote workforce. So a lot of what we do is based on open source. You might have heard of our projects, Flux and Flagger, which are in the CNCF as graduated projects. Flux was also the project that kicked off the term GitOps. And it's been great to see the adopters list and the community grow over the last few years. So much so that large cloud vendors and other organizations like Microsoft, AWS, VMware, GitLab, and others have adopted it and are actually using it under the hood to offer GitOps to their customers. Some other open source projects that we have are Cortex, which isn't listed here, but is also in CNCF, which makes Prometheus scalable. And I mention that just because Prometheus is a key part of the progressive delivery possibilities with Flagger. And of course, we have many other open source projects like EKS Cuddle or Control, whichever your preference. And now we've GitOps, which is also a free open source tool that provides GitOps for your various needs and provides a UI on top of Flux. We also have the Weave GitOps Terraform controller and the GitOps tools extension for VS Code. There's lots more, so if you're interested, definitely check us out on GitHub under Weaveworks, as well as a CNCF where you can find our projects. And of course, we are a company that has paid products and services like Flux support. So if you're interested in learning more about those, please check out the website at weave.works, or you can always reach out to me directly. So a little bit of housekeeping, as I mentioned, well, I didn't actually mention this. So we have booked about 30 to 60 minutes for these sessions. So I imagine we might go to the top of the hour if we get questions. So, but we have a hard stop at the top of the hour. So I know I don't have to explain too much about Zoom anymore. The one thing that I will mention is that if you do have a question that you'd like to ask in the chat, if you could just make sure that you change the to everyone so that the entire audience can see your questions. We like to have a lot of audience participation if we can, and oftentimes we'll encourage that chat. So don't be afraid to put that to everyone unless it's something burningly private. So I will drop all of these links into the chat for everybody, but I just wanted to give you guys some links for connecting with the Flux team, as well as the Testkube folks. So I will go ahead and drop these in the chat in just a few minutes. And also, we have some upcoming events that you might be interested in after today's presentation. So March 9th, there is a CNCF on-demand webinar, Monolith Microservices with Bite-Sized Kubernetes. That's with Leo Murillo and Chris Richardson. On the 14th, we'll be doing building internal developer platforms with EKS and GitOps. And then a couple more CNCF events and a VS Code live stream. And at the end of the month, Michael Bridgen, who is an original creator of Flux, who works at Pulumi now, will be back and talking about Flux and Pulumi together. So make sure you come back and join us for those upcoming sessions. So some basics, if you're brand new, we just want to quickly cover what is GitOps, As the name implies, it's Git plus ops, or sometimes we like to say it's operations by pull request, where you have a repo as your single source of truth. It's not just app or dev or just operations, but really a methodology that crosses all areas. We talk about GitOpsing all the things, and the business value that comes with that are reliability, velocity, and security benefits. So it's a paradigm or a methodology. It's not just one single tool or technology. Of course, we're very excited about our Flux project, and we work really hard to get it to the place where we've already brought GitOps value, but we're thinking about the vision of the most powerful way we can think about GitOps in the coming years and hopefully decades. And we really do feel that even if you're not using Kubernetes, you can still do GitOps. But if you are using Kubernetes, it's really a part of the evolution of Kubernetes, leveraging the Kubernetes API and what that brings. And really, it's the next stage and the way of leveraging the benefits of that technology. And we're excited to be a part of that community in a very deep way. Be sure to follow the work of the GitOps working group under the CNCF app delivery tag. Their focus is to clearly define a vendor-neutral, principle-led meaning of GitOps, and that is actually established now. You can also check them out at opengitops.dev. So the 4 principles of GitOps, I'll run through these very quickly. Not everybody has these 4 principles, so really, anywhere you start is a great way to get started on your GitOps journey, whether you're using Git as your versioning system or not. The important thing is that you're using a versioning system. Other core principles are that you have a declarative system and that you have a way in which changes are automatically applied to that system. And then at the end, you have ways of reconciling or ensuring correctness as well as alerts. So that's a very, very quick and dirty overview of 4 principles. And if you're interested in learning more, as I mentioned before, please go and check out the opengitops.dev site. So that is all for my very quick introduction. I'm going to turn it over to Abdallah. And if you could turn your camera and your microphone on and go ahead and share your screen, I'll stop sharing now. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
How's it going? Thank you.
Good.
My light today is not, standing up, so I put it downstairs, and probably I look like a monster at the moment. So I hope you don't mind that.
That's all good. You look great. We can see you. That's the important thing.
So I'm gonna share my screen. Is that right?
Perfect. Yep, go for it.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for the introduction, Stacy. My name is Abdallah, and again, thanks for Stacy and Priyanka, actually from the Flux community, who actually made this happen. I work as a developer advocate at Testkube. A little bit about my background. I've been doing DevRel before and software engineering and product. So kind of trying out everything actually, but I've always stayed close to the developer tools market. So that's where my passion is at the moment. I'm actually living at the moment in Dubai. It's around 10 p.m. here. I just had my late run of the night, and now I'm excited to share with you a little bit about Testkube and Flux. If you want to follow me on Twitter, Abidraba or Abidraba, however you want to pronounce it. Actually, I'm thinking it's a pretty bad username. I should think of changing it. But regardless, this is my Twitter, and if you want to join on GitHub, I'm one of those people who uses GitHub as a social media, so I like to look at what other people do. You can actually probably follow me there if you're interested. And today I'm gonna be talking about GitOps testing. It's actually a term that when you look it up in Google, you won't find a lot of content about it, and probably because we haven't been talking enough about it on how GitOps is actually changing testing, and perhaps that was the reason, because we didn't have the tools for it yet. The GitOps methodology and framework is still growing, and as Stacy said, there is like a vision for it, and hopefully this is part of that vision that touches the testing part. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Flux and Testkube, which is the company or project that I work for, and tell you how you can achieve actually the GitOps testing. So before starting to talk about tests, let's talk about where we actually run these tests. So usually it's in your CI/CD pipeline, and traditionally the CI/CD pipeline would look something similar. You would run some unit tests once you push your code to GitHub, and then you would try to build the application's container. And once you build it, you probably push it somewhere, publish it into a container registry. Ideally, you would want to change the configuration of the deployment. So for example, the Kubernetes deployment, you want to change the version of the container that you just published using, I don't know, Helm or Customize. And finally, you want to deploy that into your cluster and perhaps even think about, what happens if it's already deployed, if someone deleted it and stuff like that, reconciliation of the cluster. But one of the main issues that I have with this term of CI/CD is that we usually use them in conjunction, and that's because before, I believe, this GitOps movement, we didn't have a way of running the continuous integration and continuous deployment in separate places. So it usually always remained in one single place, like a big monolith, as you can see here, and that was your GitHub action and your Circle CI or what have you. But then with the introduction of GitOps, we were able to actually go from this big monolith again to like a separated process where the integration is happening in one place. So your tests and the build of the container and publishing of it in one side. And then hopefully with Flux in your cluster, it's like a little agent. If you don't know about it, it's an agent sitting in your cluster, and it's looking at the Git repository, and as soon as it sees a change, it tries to apply these changes into the cluster. So the deployment of the application would stay there, and because the agent is actually inside the cluster, it would be able to know about the state of the cluster. How is it different from GitHub? And if someone manually changed something or deleted something, Flux would automatically reconcile. That's what we mean with reconciliation of these states. One of the cool things about this GitOps workflow again is we went from this push methodology. Like this previous pipeline was like totally pushing all the changes from your CI/CD pipeline into your Kubernetes cluster. But the cool thing with GitOps is that now we have a pull mechanism. Because the agent is sitting inside and it's looking at the repository and it's taking the information instead of that information being applied into the cluster from the CI. And that actually has a lot of benefits. First of all, it's simplicity, but also you can automate a lot of these processes. But the most important part is also like the security aspect. You do not need to expose your your network of the cluster or internal company's VPN for your CI to apply the changes that you're working on. But we talked about the common things in an application deployment phase, but we still have more things to run, and it's our tests. So the question arises, when and where do we run those tests? There are multiple tests that we can run: integration, end-to-end, smoke tests, and probably you want to run these in different life cycles of the deployment of the application. So one of these is actually on application build. Here would be perhaps your unit tests. These are pretty fast, and probably they're sitting in your CI pipeline, and they're pretty simple to run. But then once you've deployed the application, you want to know how you can actually figure out that the deployment went well, but then run tests against that deployment. So you're ensuring that you're running tests against a new version of the app and not an old version. And how about compute intensive tests? These are probably the load tests where you want to simulate 1 million tests into your cluster. And you probably don't want to do that every time you're running your CI pipeline. So you want to run it probably on schedule or manually sometimes. So you really don't know how to or where to put these tests actually. But then another interesting question is, can I run tests on cluster reconciliation? So that Flux, once it reconciles the state of the cluster with what you have in GitHub, it produces some events. It would be actually interesting to test the cluster once everything is actually deployed and because sometimes it takes a minute, but sometimes it takes hours to deploy stuff. So it would be great to detect when that reconciliation happens and run tests upon it. So there is like different times and places where you can run these tests, but because of the complexity of all of this, it's still CI still remained coupled to the CD. Because if you want to run your integration tests from your CI pipeline, probably your CI still needs access into your cluster. If you want to run K6 or Postman or what have you, you'd usually add them to the CI. You would open again the firewall of your cluster. Didn't we say that this firewall was closed because of the GitOps methodology? So yeah, this again opens up some networking issues that we're talking about. But also, the CI somehow needs to know the state of the cluster, right? And that makes things a little more complicated. Am I testing the new version of the app? Was the deployment actually correct for me to start testing? And where did I get that information from? And does my CI now needs to talk to whichever agent is running inside? And the most important question again is like, is the cluster fully reconciled? So to add more fuel to the fire, I'll just throw out some questions here that you might be interested in hearing. What happens if you want to rerun your tests, right? Do you need to retrigger the entire CI pipeline? That could take hours. And do you really need to build that your application and run all the specific tests just to run that test that you wanted to be running in the beginning? So rewriting tests becomes a little more complicated. And actually, one of the interesting things that happens is that depending on the tools that you're using, these tests can actually generate artifacts or results, if you will. So for example, there is a tool called Cypress. It actually makes UI tests. And so it opens like a browser and it takes your behavioral test that you've written in JavaScript and it tries to run it, and then it generates probably some videos and screenshots of that process. So when it fails, you want to know what actually happened with that. And if you want to store these videos and screenshots, probably what we've seen people do is actually connect their CI pipelines to a storage bucket. So that could be Amazon S3, and then upload those videos into Cypress so you could review them later. But then you have test results being spread around in multiple places, but it's also not trivial to connect these systems together. And you're just adding more complexity. And finally, whose responsibility is to add is the whole thing. If I wanted to add a new test, does my QA team need to go to the DevOps team? Is this like a workflow that works in an agile environment? So these are one of the questions, most of the questions that we were asking ourselves when we were trying to build a solution for it. One of the things that we saw that was common is that there is a lot of very good test tools out there that we did not want to compete against, and we did not want to rework the wheel. But the problem with these tests like K6 and SoapUI and Cypress and Postman is that they run on specific use cases, but they're not thought. They did not have Kubernetes in mind. And by that, I mean, if you want to run one of those tests, you need to think about how do I containerize it? And how do I put it inside my cluster? What triggers that test? Like in what systems I need to be connecting it to? So the process of just taking this test and running it in Kubernetes is not that simple. So all of this to say that running testing Kubernetes applications is actually hard, and it's multifaceted. There's multiple points in time where you want to run them, and hopefully one of the solutions for that is what we actually call the cloud native testing. So what does that mean? Basically, it means taking advantage of the cloud native solutions and Kubernetes that we have already to apply it into the testing of your applications. And that goes by taking advantage of the scalability. For example, What if I want to run multiple tests in parallel, actually, or just run the same test like a million times? Kubernetes is actually pretty well built for the scalability of that, and that's one of the advantages of it. But then you also want to make it flexible, and flexible with regards to when you want to run those tests. So again, you don't want to retrigger that CI pipeline with all the things that are going on just for that specific test that you wanted to see the results for. But also, if your team wanted to add a new test into your cluster, how do you do that? And are you actually allowing them to add it? And finally, we just talked about how K6 and Postman and all these tools are great, but they aren't that easy to automate. And ideally, what you want to have is just like automation out of the box, where you just take the test and you put it into your cluster, and there it is. It's already automated. And surprise, surprise, that's what we actually worked at Testkube. So Testkube is Kubernetes native testing framework, and by that we mean that your tests are actually living inside of the cluster, and they are defined inside the cluster, and they never need to leave your Kubernetes cluster. And it's an open source project. So this is totally self-serve solution. There's a CNCF. We are actually a CNCF member, and we're actually soon releasing Testkube Cloud, which probably helps simplifying some of these. But then Testkube, in essence, it's test orchestration and running. So it takes your tests, it runs them for you, it saves the results inside of your cluster. So you can actually have one common place where everything is running. And yeah, actually, talk is cheap. So we're gonna show you a quick demo of what that looks like. I'm gonna go here into my terminal to show you that I have a simple Kubernetes cluster. Where I have one application, which is an API server, and we want to actually start testing that API server. So one of the things that you can do in order to use Testkube to run those tests is actually, first of all, installing Testkube. So if you run the command Testkube init, it'll install Testkube and all its components inside of the cluster. So you can start using it. I'll actually show you what that looks like. So for example, I'll go into the Testkube namespace, and you have a bunch of components here that we installed for you. There is like a dashboard, there is an API server for the dashboard. There is like a database, a MongoDB database, where you were saving all the results of the test and so on. Actually, you can get rid of most of these systems and have a very minimal installation of Testkube, but we just wanted to give you as many possibilities as possible. And if you wanted to create a test in Testkube, you can actually do that through the command line. But what I actually prefer is actually running it from the dashboard. So I'm just gonna run Testkube dashboard, and what would this make is actually create a port forward into the port 8080. So this is still running. This dashboard is still running inside my cluster. And we have an API server that we just saw, and we want to create a test for it. So I'll just go here and add a new test. I'll choose the type of test that I want to run against it. So in this case, you have multiple types of tests: Cypress, Ginkgo, Grail, K6, QPug, and so on. Actually, you can even bring your own tests, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later. But for example, for this situation, I want to use a curl test. So I'm going to create that. I'm going to give it a name. And then, you choose where this test is living. So actually, there are multiple sources for the test. It could be a Git repository, or a file residing in your computer, or a string that you can pass to it. So I'm actually, for the simplicity, I'm going to choose the string. And I'm going to go to the Testkube documentation here to copy a very simple curl string. So if I go to the documentation and to the test types, you can see here all the test types that we just talked about: JMeter, Playwright, Maven, Postman. But I want to copy an example of the curl test. So I'm just going to copy this JSON that reflects what a test is going to look like. And I'll just paste it here. And the URL has to be the URL of our application that is sitting in our cluster. So I'm going to take that now. So I'll do kube control get services. And this is the service where our application is deployed. It's in the default namespace and it's in the port 3000. So I'm just going to copy this one and actually just put it here, .default for the namespace and then the port. And what this test is actually going to do is very simple. It's just going to expect that the status of the test is 200. So I'll click on create here. And once a test is created, one of the things that I actually want to show you is that if you go to the settings tab and you go to the definitions section, you'll actually see that this is a Kubernetes file. This is Kubernetes custom resource. And that's because Testkube actually creates a custom resource of your test and adds it natively into Kubernetes. So if you're paying attention, you'll actually see what we mean by GitOps testing, but I'm going to talk about that later. I'm going to run a very simple test right now. So this is right now in my cluster. I just started the execution of a test. And then you can click on the test and go to the log output to see the logs of this test. Again, this is running inside your cluster. These logs are also saved inside your cluster. You can actually trigger as many tests as you want, like, and then just like see the results of them. But I'm going to go to a production cluster. This cluster is the one that I'm using. This one has a little more tests. It's in demo.testkube.io, and you can actually go and create tests by yourself and test this one. So I want to show you what we mean by saving not only the logs of the test, but also the artifacts that a test can generate. So we have a bunch of tests here. These are Cypress tests because I just searched for it. And I just saw that this one has a failed test. So I want to investigate what went on there. So I'll just click on it. And I can actually just click on this test right here. And it'll show me the log of the test, how it failed and so on. But it also, Cypress has generated a screenshot that we've saved into the cluster. And now you can just have access to it through the artifact section. So if I click here and I open this image, you'll be able to see what went wrong with the specific test that you just ran in the cluster. So this is a quick demo of what Testkube can actually do. And I'm going to go back to the slides now to continue talking. So yeah, so basically Testkube takes care of the heavy lifting for you. As you saw, we did not need to create a container for curl to run. Testkube just created that under the hood for you. In fact, you could even bring your own container if you wanted, but we support a lot of types of tests at the moment, and we accept actually community contributions to add as many tests as possible. Testkube is not, does not have a type of test to run. It just runs whatever test you can actually bring to it. But it's actually simplifying the process of containerizing it, automating the whole process for you. One of the cool things is that the tests were running inside your cluster. So you do not need your CI pipeline to access your cluster again. And following this GitOps principle of like the security, everything is running inside your cluster. And so no firewalls open, no networking issues or security problems that can arise there. Then Testkube saves the artifacts for you. So it acts as an artifact storage. So you can review multiple states of the test in the future. One of the cool things, as you can see, we just clicked a bunch of times on creating tests. And because we're running these tests inside of the Kubernetes cluster, we scaled up and down as much as possible. So that's, taking advantage of the cloud native way. But also there was no, complex script or boilerplate code that we needed to create. And this actually just makes your CI/CD pipeline much, much simpler. So in the past, what you would have is, like a big monolith CI/CD where you have your tests running in the pipeline. And if you wanted to rerun, you'd have to run the entire pipeline again. But in this case, what Testkube is doing is actually bringing the tests inside of your cluster. So your CI/CD pipeline becomes much, much more simpler. And you could probably use the CLI to trigger the tests from the CI, but there are multiple ways of running those tests. So yeah, good segue is like, how can you run the tests? You can actually run them on schedule. You can create jobs in Kubernetes to run your tests. So these could be, for example, your load tests that you want to do at 3 a.m. at night where you don't have a lot of users. Also, you could use the Testkube CLI or the dashboard that you just saw in case you want to run a test manually, rerun it, for example, if you want to see if the behavior is continuing or is the same or what have you. You also want to test it on an API, so probably connecting it or piping it to external systems that can test that. But the most interesting to me, and the ones that I like most, is actually being able to trigger a test on the deployment of an annotated Kubernetes object. So Testkube would actually detect that you deployed a new deployment or service or pod, and it'll run the test against that instantly. And it also could actually listen to cluster events, whatever is happening in the cluster, which Testkube can listen to and then start running tests against that. And I think that's one of the, also this last point is one of the interesting parts why we believe that also Testkube works in a very interesting, GitOps methodology. And so, because Testkube, as you saw before, is a create tests in a custom resource, and someone that loves custom resource and Kubernetes files is actually Flux. So actually now, Flux doesn't only love your Git repository and the Kubernetes files that it has. Flux also likes your tests, as I like to call it. And I want to show you a little demo of what that looks like. So in this cluster that I had, I've actually installed Flux into it. So you can see if I do kubectl get namespace. So Flux is already here. I have a Git repository, which I'm going to open here, which contains, some configurations of my cluster. There is like the image folder, which contains the application code, some infrastructure code as well, and then the definition of my tests. So ideally, one of the interesting things that you want to do is have this folder where you can track all your tests and version them, and have Flux reconciliate the state of that. So what I'm going to do now is go back to the VS Code, and I'm actually going to show you an example of a test that we want to use Flux to deploy with. So I created here a simple Postman test. This basically you created through the Postman application. So if I open that, let's see if that opens. And I'll probably try to zoom. I have here some simple tests that basically are testing if, the status code is 200, the content type is application JSON, the body, and so on. So once I've written my test using Postman and I want to deploy them, what I want to do is just like export this test. So probably there's an option to export it here. In any case, I have it exported, and what you export from that is a Postman collection file, where basically these tests that we just saw are defined. And then we want to put that test inside of in our Git repository. So what I would do is use the Testkube CLI to create a new test. I actually have here the command already ready. So I'm going to call it an API server test. The file is going to be whatever your Postman collection is sitting. So it's in this folder. And then I'm actually going to give it some environment variables, like what is the application that I want to test. So the base URL of that this Postman test are going to run against is the API server here. And here I set it to generate the CRD only, because I don't want to create the test manually and into the cluster. I want Flux to do that for me. So first of all, what I would do is generate the CRD. This is like the output. It's just a bunch of code. I'll just copy this output and put it into my test folder that we talked about a little bit ago. So I'm going to say API server test.yaml, and I'll paste that code here. So this is my test defined in a Kubernetes custom resource, and then I'll just add here to the customization API server test. And once I've done that, what I want to do is commit these files and upload them to GitHub. So I'm going to run the command git add everything, which we already did, and then git commit, adding Postman test, and finally git push. Now, because Flux is connected to that repository that I showed you here, so if I refresh, you can probably see the test that we just added. Flux is actually going to read the Git repository. In fact, I'm going to just trigger a reconciliation, even though these happen in a schedule, but I'm just going to apply it manually. And if we go back now to the dashboard that we had before, you can see, if I go here to the main, let's see if it's actually there. It's not. So probably, first of all, I need to reconciliate the source. So Flux can detect any changes, and then just reconciliate the customization. But for some reason, this is not working. Let's run it again and test it out. This should be a pretty quick thing. Probably there should be an issue with my GitHub token, perhaps, and that's why it's not running. But you know, that things that happen in a live demo. Actually, what you can see, the result is, as you expect, a test is just created in Testkube. And you know, the way that you've created that test is in a declarative way, the GitOps friendly approach in a versioned manner, which you know, Flux can now take advantage of. So yeah, that's almost all that I had to share with you. I'd encourage you to go and check out the GitHub for Testkube. We've written an entire article in our blog where we show this process of how you can actually run your tests with Flux and take advantage of this, you know, GitOps testing machine with instructions on how to run the whole thing. And yeah, we have a vibrant Discord community that you can join and ask us whatever. And finally, follow us on Twitter, where we have some updates. Hopefully, this QR code is connected to the blog article that I just showed you, so you can follow it from there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Abdallah. There were some comments and some questions that came in as you were presenting, and I didn't want to interrupt you because you were on your flow. But we can get to them now. And if anybody in the audience has any other questions, throw them into the chat. We're going to just go through some of the comments and questions now that I've been tracking. So at the kind of beginning of your presentation, Kevin had made the comment, most painful topic for me as well for years, when and where to run my tests. Terraform plus Flux plus and app dev and parallel and then Blaze said the second most painful topic is where to keep the results. So I don't know if you have any comments on either of those, but I think they were feeling the pain.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually touched on that. It's you know, tests are just multifaceted, and there are so many test types, and you can run them in so many places and at different times. But then again, as the problem that they mentioned, there is a problem of saving those tests. And as you saw in the demo, actually all these test results is actually saved inside of the cluster. And so you know, they're part of this cloud native approach of testing. They're very good comments. It's actually our biggest pain as well.
So there was also someone who, I think it was Blaze, who said, so if I have tests in PyTest, would I use the type string and enter the entry point?
So yeah, that's a pretty good question. Actually, you can create, you know, there is a bunch of tests that are here. So PyTest is not one of these. The cool thing, and thanks for actually mentioning this, is that we have something called a container executor. So this is basically a way for you to bring whichever test you want and create it and run it with Testkube. So if it's in PyTest, you would just create the container image for that, and then Testkube takes care of the rest. You could actually do that to answer your question. So let me choose a specific type of test. You can have it as a string method, as we just did it with the curl test. But I guess the most interesting part is putting that test in a Git repository and then just pulling it from there as long as updates are made. But you can even you know, upload the file. There are multiple ways of connecting these tests into the cluster.
Cool, Thanks. Blaze, let us know if you want more elaboration on that, but I think that was great.
Cool.
And then Diego asks, how would we add secrets to the tests?
Another very good question. Actually, as you saw in the test that I just created, so for example, the curl test, we can just go for this one. If you want to do it through the dashboard or the CLI, you can do it either way. But you can go to the settings section, and then here you can see that there is like a variables and secrets section. And here you would add the environment variables. It could be actually, a secret reference. So it could be a Kubernetes secret that you have in your cluster and you just want to read it from there. Or it could just be like a basic text that you want to save. So there are multiple ways of adding arguments, variables, and secrets. But yeah, the main way that we see our customers do and are interested is using the Kubernetes secret one, of course.
We have more, so if you're cool with it, I'm just going to keep peppering you with these questions.
Keep it rolling.
So Kevin is asking, if it's running in the cluster, how do you test things like ingress? Run it in a separate test cluster?
So I guess if you want to test the ingress, that is something that you wouldn't be able to test from inside the cluster. Perhaps if you have another test cluster, you can test the ingress. But I guess the easiest solution, if you want to test the ingress, is in your CI pipeline. I'm sure if you join our Discord community and ask that question, a lot of people are going to give you very different and varied ways of doing that. But yeah.
Nice. So we also have Blaze commenting, this could be really good for platform engineering, where the cluster admins have to support disparate development teams and provide them a suite of baseline checks. Does results stored inside the cluster mean that that only admins can see the results?
Yeah, so at the moment, in the open source platform that we have, you can install Testkube into your cluster, and then everyone who has access to the namespace would be able to see those results, not just the admins. But we are building, a Testkube cloud solution that is probably coming up in the following weeks, where you can actually just, customize who can access specific tests and who can create them and who can see the results. But yes, I totally agree with him. It's it was a him or a her? Did I mispronounce, or a they?
I don't know. It's Blaze. So
whatever. Blaze, yeah. This is great.
Him,
exactly. Awesome.
Thanks, Blaze.
Of course. This is a great, as you said, way for platform engineering to generate, just build the test infrastructure and then just have your QA teams, your developers just come here and create tests on demand, running them whenever they want, and so on and so forth. So it definitely goes on with this platform engineering message as well.
So Christopher is asking, in the test object you created in the repo, can the actual test be referenced by file name as a source, or does it need to be part of the file?
So could you say that again?
So it says, can the actual test be referenced by file name as a source, or does it need to be part of the file?
So there are multiple types of tests. For example, the Cypress one is actually an entire project that you need to import. So in that case, you wouldn't be able to reference a specific file. But there are some other testing tools that are file referenceable. So that is a possibility as well, where you can reference just a file or even a folder or project in GitHub as however you like it.
And then Kevin is saying, have you also looked outside of Kubernetes as well? With managed Kubernetes and stuff, there are so many infrastructure changes which affect your Kubernetes cluster. Detecting changes inside Kubernetes is a big argument for me to try Testkube. It would be awesome to have something like this for all the cloud providers like GCP as well. For example, if you make any changes via Terraform.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the cool things of Flux is that Flux can actually generate those events for you if you're using Flux to reconcile the state of the cluster. And then you can just trigger these tests depending on the reconciliation state that you just got from Flux. As I said before, the multiple ways of running it, you could, I'm sure that the complicated part for you in a managed Kubernetes is, deployment of annotated and labeled Kubernetes objects. But whichever cluster events on whichever agent that you have inside the cluster triggering events, Testkube can actually listen to it. Or you can even just call that API directly, the Testkube API to create a test or even trigger the test manually.
So Blaze asks, do you have any special features for consolidating or displaying test results similar to Allure?
I'm not familiar with Allure. So initially, as you saw here, I'm actually going to go to the production cluster where we have a lot of tests running. At the moment, one of the things that I like the most about it is that every test tool generates a different different log output and whatever. Hopefully, maybe your test tools can generate some JUnits, but maybe it doesn't. For some reason, the dashboard is not working. Maybe I can just trigger that again. The interesting part is that Testkube has a single place where all these tests are saved. Excuse me for changing many times the tabs. But whichever test you create, you'll be able to see these logs from the inside. If they're running, JUnit, if you can generate JUnit results, then you can have it there. But at the moment, what Testkube can offer you is a single place where everything is saved, and you can debug it from there.
Cool. And Blaze dropped the link.
Which, by the way,
sorry, go ahead.
That is a question that I'm sure in the Discord, my colleagues will be able to answer better. I feel like I haven't done a good job at answering that question.
No worries. There's a link for you to check out that I'll forward to you as well if you can't see it right now. And then someone else was also asking about other tools, other GitOps tools and integrations. I'm assuming that you guys have integrated with many tools. It's not just Flux and other things like that. So do you want to talk a little bit about integrations and other tools that you work well with?
Yeah, so I mean, we have an integration with GitHub Actions in case you want to run your tests from, run Testkube from GitHub directly. Flux is actually our latest integration and the one that I was excited the most about. The Flux community has been very helpful in helping me set up that integration. But there is also, Argo CD has a different way of integrating Testkube with it, and we also have an integration with it. But eventually, because you can use the CLI whatever you want, you can just take it to your internal company CI pipeline and just run it from there. Ideally, these integrations just simplify things for you, but with the Testkube CLI that has its own authentication mechanism, it can sit whatever you want. But yeah, Argo CD and Flux are what the community is most excited about. I'm pretty sure about it.
Awesome. Well, I think we got through all of those questions. Thank you so much for the presentation, for the demos, and thank you everybody for participating in the chat. I'm sorry that the chat was disabled early on. I'm glad that I found the setting in Zoom that changed on me where I had to turn that on. So I'm glad we could all participate in this discussion together. And yeah, if you have questions for Abdallah, please find him on these channels, join the Discord, and I will follow up with an email to everyone who registered for this webinar with an email with all of these links and many resources that we talked about today. So thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, we'll go ahead and close it down. Lots of thanks in the chats, and it was a great job. And yeah, we appreciate it. So thanks so much, Abdallah.
Thanks everyone for your time. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks everybody. Take care.